Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Labor Party supports the motion that is before the House today that no writ be issued for a by-election in the Epsom Electoral District. We will not be party to forcing a by-election in this electorate because it is not in the public interest. We all know that we are very close to a general election, and a by-election is unnecessary, would be a waste of taxpayers' money. They are expensive and would be seen by voters to be a frivolous political stunt. And I think there's been far too many of them already in the Epsom electorate. And we would like to take the opportunity today in this debate to say to John Key, it is time that we did change the Electoral Act to stop the coat-tailing provision that enables parties like ACT to come in by winning a seat. And it is time that we took these issues seriously instead of only looking at the close political advantage that might be gained from them. But I want to begin by saying that I think this is a very sad day in the New Zealand Parliament, a very sad day, a day because of the action of a member of this House. We are debating not issuing a writ for a by-election. It's been caused by the conviction of a member of a parliament for electoral fraud. It's a sad day for John Banks, and I feel sorry for him at a personal level. He is a man that has come from the school of hard knocks. He was brought up in a number of foster homes. He was pushed from pillar to post. He was estranged from his parents, who spent much of their lives in and out of jail. And he was a man who decided to make a better life for himself and his family. And he pulled himself up and became the Member of Parliament for Whangarei. He was proud to be a Member of Parliament. He was proud to be the people's representative, as he used to say, living in God's own country. He became a minister and he strutted his stuff as Minister of Police. He was very proud that he could pass the police fitness test, probably the only Minister of Police that has. He could be funny, he could be outrageous, he could be caring, and he could be courageous. But he has been proven to be cunning, to be conniving, to have been careless, and in the end he was convicted. And that is why we are here today debating this issue. So I feel sorry for him on a personal level, but I feel sorry for this Parliament as well. None of us like to be here doing this. It is not the way to end a political career. Most of us would like to have the opportunity to stand before our colleagues and make a valedictory speech, as many will come July. Some of us are sent to the wilderness for a short time when the voters vote us out. Others end as John Banks have. Unfortunately, it is not very often. And my cousin, when he went through the list and the litany of problems, always only mentioning the Labor Party, was generous enough to mention that probably there has only been one real electoral fraud issue, or one real fraud issue, and that of Philip Field. So I think it is a sad day for this Parliament, and I wish we didn't have to do this. It's sad because the truth is that John Banks had been misleading this House for almost 2 years, and a blind eye was turned to that. A blind eye was turned because when you look at the evidence that was provided from the witnesses, it was plain as the nose on the face that Mr Banks knew he had received anonymous donations. He had solicited anonymous donations from people he knew. And it's been clear to many, including Mr Macready, who lives in my electorate, and Mr Brooking, that this man, this Member of Parliament, was misleading the public, and he knew that he had got anonymous donations. And the sadness is that the Prime Minister knew that as well. It was his job to uphold the highest standards. And I've listened as we've gone through the list of members of Parliament who were ministers who have lost their jobs under John Key, how he upholds the highest of standards. And I think in the beginning he did. I think in the beginning he wanted to show that he was upholding standards and was looking very carefully at how he managed his cabinet. But as the years have gone by, those standards have slipped. And they slipped to the very bottom when it came to John Banks, because he knew John Banks had done wrong. But he turned a blind eye because he needed that one discredited vote from the ACT party. He needed it because he needed to pass legislation. So he didn't want to know that wrong had been done. I have to say that it's a sort of cynical manipulation of our democratic system that many of our old soldiers went to war to oppose. They don't like cynical manipulation of democratic systems, but that is what has happened under the leadership of John Key. And I think it's absolutely right. And let's have a look at what he's been saying about holding on to power. He does have his motto. He has said, whatever it takes. That is what he has said. That's a quote. Whatever it takes. He said, we're going to do what we practically can to form the next government. That meant taking the vote of John Key with a deal that was done over a cup of tea. A deal that has been discredited, criticised ever since. He was so desperate to do a deal then that he's prepared to continue in that vein at this next election. He is prepared to put aside the fact that in September 2012, Colin Craig, a person he's going to do a deal with, sent out 20,000 leaflets in his Mr Key's own Helensville electorate, telling the voters of Helensville not to vote for Mr Key because, quote, he was too gay to be their Member of Parliament. But needs must. That's a quote. That's a direct quote from Mr Colin Craig. I would be wondering whether I'd be wanting to do a deal with him. But their deal will be done just as it was with John Banks. So the sadness to me is the blind eye was turned when it should have been investigated and action taken 2 years ago. We have had enough of those dodgy deals, but they are going to happen again in this election. But what happened from that grubby deal and blind eye was we had legislation passed with John Banks' vote that many in New Zealand had opposed. And the most obvious example is asset sales. Thousands of New Zealanders signed a petition against asset sales. The vote was so close in this House because many parties also opposed it. But with John Banks' vote, they were able to sell off our assets, a hugely unpopular policy. And of course, it was sold to the public that they'd given the government a mandate to do it. Well, I don't believe when people vote, they vote on just one thing. They vote on a number of things. There are some things they like and some things they don't like. For example, they took the Prime Minister at his word that he would not increase GST. Coming to government, he did. But then they returned him to power 3 years later. So they forgave him for that. So when they say we have a mandate to sell assets, they did not listen to the voices of the people when it came to the oldest form of talking to the government in a petition to this Parliament, and they relied on the vote of John Banks. Another example is charter schools, and I could go through a number of pieces of legislation passed over those 2 years with the vote of a person who's been convicted of electoral fraud and the National Party knew that 2 years ago. I what?
Order. Order, please.
Mr Speaker.
I'm calling Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call in this debate about